Hi, my name is Autumn Campbell, and this is my self-reflection video on working against racial bias for ITI 670. So I have some notes here on the side of my screen that I'm going to be referring to about the Inspire module that I worked through and some of my own personal experiences. So after completing the module, there were a few different things that I learned. First of all, it was really great to be refreshed on many ideas that I've learned in prior classes and just in prior courses throughout my education. So there were things like racial bias and normalization of white characteristics and some statistics that I'd already had been aware of. But it's always good to have those be told again and to learn about them again and always have them fresh in my mind. So that was something that I really enjoyed learning from the Inspire module. Also, I realized throughout that module, looking at some of the different examples that they gave of the incorrect behaviors, that those were actually experiences that I've had in my first year of teaching. So that was really interesting to be able to relate my life to those examples that they gave. I also realized through the module that a lot of these concerns and things that they talk about are things that are very near and dear to my heart with my own students and things that I want to be aware of and to be working against. Um, I also, as I was working through the module, began to realize that sometimes some of the things that they were talking about and teaching on were a little bit hard to hear. It's hard to see those things maybe in myself. Sometimes I don't want to acknowledge that I make mistakes and sometimes can fall into categories that I don't like. So that was really eye-opening and helps me to just continue self-reflection and to continue self-improvement as I continue to identify the areas that I need to improve in my own teaching, in my own self-improvement, and just becoming a better human being for my students. So information that was new to me was the consciousness versus the disconsciousness. That was an idea that I had not really heard before. It has been a concept that I've seen other people kind of teach on, but putting a word and giving it a name was really cool. I also really liked how the module gave you examples, and we had to identify which ones were conscious and which ones were disconsciousness. And so that was really a cool idea that I had never learned before. I also didn't know the statistic that even though schools are very culturally diverse, that there are still 80% white teachers in the classroom. And that's something that kind of was a shock to me. And so that was definitely something new that I had not known before the module. Another question that was presented to me in the PowerPoint is, how will you use the knowledge you acquired from this module to shape your professional practice? So there's a few things that I wrote down. I want to engage my students to understand what I can incorporate into the curriculum to make it more culturally relevant. So I really want to be having those dialogues with my students to understand what they would like to see in their classroom, because I'm not just there for me, I'm there for them. And so I'd love to be able to uh, to engage in conversation with them frequently and not just maybe at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, but I want to, on a weekly, maybe monthly basis, talk to them about what would you like to see in the content that I'm teaching. I'd also really like to reach out to families and utilize the cultural and the family experiences that my students are having. I'd love to have families incorporated into my classroom and have their influence in there. I think that can be really powerful. Also, I like to engage again in dialogue with my students, whether that be an anonymous tip box or maybe anonymous letters, or however my students feel comfortable, having them give me maybe some suggestions or maybe to talk about things that I have personally done that they feel that I can do better. I know it can be intimidating for students to come up and tell a teacher what they can do better. So I'd really like to have maybe some sort of box or something where students feel like they could leave me a note and say, hey, when you did this, it made me feel like this. And so then that would be able to help me to realize, oh, wow, that was something I didn't even know I was doing, but give the students an opportunity to do that on a little bit more anonymous basis. I also hope to engage in conversations after an incident in my classroom has occurred. So whether a student has acted out, or whether a student has gotten in trouble for something, I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with that student to hear how they're feeling and why they think that happened, to really understand and make sure that my students don't think that I treat them a certain way because they are a certain race or they are economically in a different area of life than I am. So I'd love to have those conversations and really hear from my students. Lastly, I'd love to continue lessons like the Inspire module to really keep teaching myself how to be better and how to self-improve all of these areas. So another point in the PowerPoint is, once in the field, what steps will you take to guard against implicit bias and discriminatory practices? So just like I'm doing now, self-reflection, I really think looking at my lessons, looking at my actions, thinking before I act and before I speak is something that's so important. So I want to make sure that I'm always coming from a place of respect and love and encouragement for my students and not from somewhere else. Also talking with my students, apologizing when I make mistakes. This is something that I think is super important. I always want to be honest with my students. And if I know I've made a mistake, acknowledging that and apologizing for it. And understanding my students, like they've mentioned in the module, it's so important to know where my students come from and what influences they have. And I'd love to be able to understand my students better so that I know where they're coming from and I don't make those mistakes as often. And to incorporate cultural influences anytime that I can, to make the students feel like the classroom is as much theirs as it is mine. The critical incident that I wanted to talk about that I feel like has really influenced my teaching. When I was in college, I went on a missions trip to Sao Paulo, Brazil. Building up to the trip, I really had this feeling of almost, I want to say, entitlement, where I felt like I was going to be to help the people there, to help their ministry, and that they were just going to be super blessed by me. And when I got there, I was actually completely wrong. I ended up learning more from them than they ever could have learned from me. They were doing things way better than I could have ever done myself. And it ended up being this very humbling, very wonderful learning experience. And it's something that I've kept with me my whole life. Since that point and taken into my teaching career. Now I approach students and colleagues and administrators with this feeling of always looking at what they can teach me instead of what I can teach them. I know that I have things to offer as a person, but I really love to approach my students with, they come from a different experience. They come from maybe a different culture, a different ethnicity. And I know that they have incredible experiences that they can teach me from. And so that's something that's changed my perspective a lot. I know that many of my current students, I work at a Title I school, come from maybe difficult home situations. A lot of my students are in foster care or homeless. I have a lot of racially diverse students, but I really want to make sure that I treat them all with respect and with love and encouragement. The module really talks about coming at students from an area of understanding. And so I would really love to understand my students and where they're coming from and treat them all that they have the same opportunity, because they are all unique and they have their own strengths. And that's really what I would love to focus on in my classroom. I actually had a fellow teacher tell me at the school that I'm at that the students, he just focuses on job skills because none of these students will ever make it to college anyways. And it really broke my heart because I I really truly believe that any student, no matter where they come from or who they are, can do whatever they would like to put their minds to, with encouragement and love and support from their teachers and their mentors. And so that was one of those moments that really opened my eyes. And I hope that through practice, self-reflection, classes like these, and through observing my students, I'll really be able to encourage them and hopefully be that teacher that can help them and love deeply for them.